Next week, the FOMC's interest rate decision for September. Wall Street will be closely watching to see if the Fed does go cut by 25 or maybe 50. But how will that affect a rate-sensitive industry like solar? For more on how investors should be looking at the space, we're bringing in Maheep Manley, Mizuho Americas Director of Clean Energy Equity Research. Maheep, good to see you. So let's start right there. Obviously, all attention is on the Fed next week, Maheep, and there's this debate we've had on this show between very smart people, whether it's going to be 25 or a supersized 50. How does that event, Maheep, how does that impact your coverage universe?
Hi, Josh, and hi, Julie. And definitely, there's a nice transition from interest rates to solar, right? This industry is very levered. We've seen this industry react to any positive news on interest rates the last year, and we'll continue to see that going forward. Most of these companies do have almost 70% leverage or debt to capital ratio. So there's definitely a lot of upside there. And then the two things to think about it. One is obviously on the fundamentals that helps reduce the interest expense going forward, but also on valuation. These industries generally get the growth multiples, which generally trend to do better in lower interest rate environments.
And the stocks, speaking of valuations, the stocks, at least as a group, have really come down quite a bit. Something else that is an upcoming potential catalyst is the U.S. presidential election, or at least it's perceived as such. We saw these stocks rally following the presidential debate. And again, this perception that if Kamala Harris's chances to become president are higher, she could potentially be more friendly to the industry. Do you think that that view is the correct one?
No, absolutely. And not just friendly, just keep the status quo of the Inflation Reduction Acts, right? And funny enough, was at a solar trade show earlier this week on Tuesday evening after, doing our meetings. Everyone was glued on their TVs just looking at the debate. And I think after later in the evening and the drinks and dinner, everyone kind of sighed and said, okay, yeah, sure, it looks like Kamala did slightly better, so that bodes well for all the renewable policies. But also President Trump talks about, he said he likes utility solar. He had caveats after that nonetheless, but still he said that. And he did say he wants jobs over here, which also bodes well for most of our companies over here. So I don't think it'll be like a very bad news if Republicans or Trump come on in. I think we've said in our notes it's maybe at worst down 20-25% impact to our stocks. But definitely the business case or the status quo will be maintained under Kamala Harris.
Maheep, let's get to some picks too. I look at your coverage universe, a few different outperforms, Enphase, Sunrun, SolarEdge, Sonova. What about First Solar, though? You're on the sidelines on that name. How come? And what do you need to see before getting more bullish?
Sure. They are the biggest beneficiary of the Inflation Reduction Act. They do get a lot of their earnings from these incentives. More than 60% of their EPS in our estimates for 2025 would come from these incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's a risk to those incentives. It's a non-zero risk, so we need to take that into account. And on top of that, you could see potential competition in the U.S. Later this year because of nearshoring, which will take 2 years to materialize. It takes at least 2 years to set up solar factories in the U.S. So I think that's the bigger question for investors. I think the near term or the next 2-3 years is already priced in. The question is, if competition comes up in the U.S. with new U.S. factories, what does that do to First Solar? And so we're on the sidelines on that, and we'll see what changes after the elections or potentially any new tariffs which U.S. imports against other countries.
Maheep, I'm also curious about U.S. penetration and adoption. We talk a lot on this show about the waning demand for electric vehicles. It feels like solar is sort of in a similar vein, but what have those adoption trends look like? Is it still as popular, I guess, with U.S. consumers?
It is. As in, if you look at the penetration rates for residential solar, we're somewhere around 5% of rooftops, of eligible rooftops are penetrated with solar. How fast this number grows, it depends on interest rates because most of the solar is bought on financing. But we think we can easily get to 10 to 12% later this decade. The challenges become in some states when it grows, say, more than 25-30% is when issues on which came up in California recently on the non-solar customer subsidizing the solar customer comes up. But I think that's somewhat of a issue later this decade or next decade.